Life is full of choices, so let's explore the best ways to thrive. This is a Connecting You podcast, hosted by me, Mayra Richards, and my marketing director, Emily Robinson. Tune in to discover a healed, healthy, and purposeful life.
Season 6 of the Connecting You podcast. We are so grateful to see you guys. We took a little break. Now we're back. Mayra has some exciting updates.
In case you're wondering why I look so thin, it's because I'm pregnant. I am pregnant. I'm due at the end of May. We're very excited to welcome our third baby. We don't know what's going to be yet, but we will soon in a couple weeks.
Is it easier preparing for the third child?
Seasons come to an end, so I think the newborn season's been really hard for me in the past, but I know that it comes to an end and then they get to be toddlers. I think that's easier. But I am a little bit scared about having a third because we've been jamming and rolling with our two, and adding one more just seems kind of crazy.
5 people, that's a lot. That's a full car's worth.
Yeah, we had to change. It's like it changes everything. You need one more hotel room. You need one more minivan. You need a bigger car. We got a minivan recently. So it just feels kind of surreal, but we're thankful. We prayed a lot about it and it felt like the right thing. And the Lord blessed us with one more. We're really, really excited. But I do think it changes a lot of things in our lives. Like a car, like you wouldn't think about that. But then they're right, 3 different schedules.
It's good to know that therapists have the same anxieties and fears as we do about uncertainty. Therapists still have to figure things out. That's what we wanted to break down in this season, talking about different types of therapy, making knowledge more accessible, understanding therapy, everything we can do for somebody who's thinking about going into therapy to feel as comfortable as possible, feel safe and understanding of expectations.
Mm-hmm.
What is the goal of therapy in general?
The goal is to grow as a person, to get better in healing, meaning if you're having any trauma in your past or whatever your life story is, to decrease how impactful that was without taking away from it, and also enhancing the good parts that it brought out of it. Meaning you are the person that you are because of what happened to you. Hopefully we help you grow into an even stronger, healthier version of that.
I've heard from people who are fearful of therapy. They don't realize they're afraid of it. They think, well, why am I going to go be dissected and talk about somebody else with my problems? What is the value of this? I need to keep moving on with my life, and that's in the past, so why am I going to think about it? Which to me has always come across as the fear of vulnerability, their fear of judgment, the fear of being critiqued or admitting mistakes to somebody.
I started going to therapy. I don't know if I've said this before or not, but I started going to therapy when I was probably 20 years old. I was in a relationship with someone who has alcoholism, and my sister actually funded my therapy. She's a couple of years older than I am. I told her what was happening. It's like, hey, he's in jail. He has alcoholism. I need to go to therapy, but I can't afford it. She laughed and she's like, I'll pay for it. I remember being like, oh, thank you so much. I started going because of a crisis. And then I realized I started feeling way better. I loved my therapy. Dissecting me is very important because I bring everything. You bring everything to the table, to any friendship, to any relationship, to any family member. You go through things in life and then you bring it to them, whether you like that or not. The way that you react, the way that you respond to things is because of what you've been through. If you're not working on developing that part of you, then you are stuck in being who you always have been. I tend to be the person that thinks that you can always be better. You can always better yourself. There's always a better response to things. I used to push people away. I don't do that. I stick with people longer. It's just a better way to do life.
People get stuck in the mindset of, this is just how life is. This is how people treat me. This is how I treat them. I just go about my day. That's not necessarily true. Maybe you feel very alone and isolated and you want friends, but also you're not open to putting yourself out there. Maybe you have shallow relationships because when the moment comes to open up, you don't. And even that, or even just like snapping at your mom, snapping at your employee, it comes from something in the past where possibly somebody hurt you and you approach everything from a defensive stance. And so you think maybe it's better to just hold it all in and not tell anybody, but that's still affecting you.
You are who you are wherever you go. If you're not working to enhance yourself, then you will always be who you are wherever you go, whoever you meet. There are parts of me, like I've been in therapy again since I was like 20. So I am 35. That's 15 years. And I still come to it's a different therapist. I haven't been with the same therapist for that long, but I still come to her and I'm like, oh no, I did this again, or this part of me showed up again. That's not who I want to be, but I want to work on being something different. Not for my kids, not for my husband, but for myself. And at the end of my life, for the legacy that's going to leave for people in general of who they're going to remember me to be. And that's why I do it. That's my why I go to therapy. I'm like, okay, well, when I die, no one's going to remember what I had, where I lived, nothing. They will remember how I made them feel. So I need to work on that because I know that I'm human. I'm not going to be perfect. I'm not trying to be perfect, but I am trying to be kind and nice and mindful. I know that those things don't come easily to me, even though I am a therapist. Empathy with all my friends just doesn't come easily to me. Maybe because I'm putting so much empathy in my work that outside of that it's a little bit harder. That I have to work on that.
And that's an important point with therapy is like you're never done.
Right.
It's never a point where you can sit and say, I've thought about this a lot. I'm never gonna react poorly again.
Right.
People do have a certain conception of maybe I'll just talk about this for 6 months and I'll be done. And of course, there's periods where you're focused on other things. You don't need to go to therapy. Maybe you went to therapy last year, you did work stuff out. Now you know what to do. You have a plan and you have the tools, but then maybe a year after not going, 2 years after not going, something is always going to come up.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you,
Right.
that you go to therapy. It's not that you're broken and you need to be put back together. It's not a judgment that you go.
People come to be heard.
Yeah.
And to feel validated and to feel like they have a space where they can just be themselves. I can't just be that with anybody on the streets or even with friends. But with my counselor, she has no skin on the game. She just listens. And then I ask, I'm like, am I wrong? I give her a chance to be like, please tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me where I messed up. Because sometimes my friends won't.
Yeah.
They love me and they care and they're nurturing and they're kind, but they won't. And I need somebody to tell me what are my flaws, where am I missing it? Where am I not being humble? Right? Where am I criticizing my husband too much? Where am I not seeing my part in this?
Therapy is not going to be the same for everyone, and it's not a judgment on you. It's just a third space where somebody who can be expected to have the tools to help you, right? We can't expect our friends and our parents and everyone who we would want to help us, but who ultimately doesn't have the communication skills to say, hey, this is what you're doing wrong, or this is where I see you keep falling into the same trap. Even if they have the empathy and are observing you enough to see it, they might not tell you.
Different seasons bring different goals. When it comes to goal setting and therapy, it's really important to think, okay, what do I want for my life, right? Some people do the word of the year. Think of 2025, our word of the year. Gavin asked, what's our word of the year? I said fulfillment. For 2025, that word is fulfillment. For 2024, the word was rest. And I remember thinking, I need to go to therapy. I don't know how to slow down. I'm always constantly going. If my job is to rest, then I'm going to need a lot of help of what that looks like, or why am I not resting, how it can be good for me. So I invested a lot of time in therapy this year for myself, and I also invested a lot of time in getting people to mentor me this year and being like, hey, I don't know how to do a lot of these things. I don't know how to create rhythms. I don't know how to make our life slow. What I thought I valued before, which was having a lot of people constantly in my house. I still do, but our girls are changing. I have two little girls. One's 4.5, one is 2. They're constantly changing and needing different things. I need to start resetting my life a lot more throughout the year than I used to, right? Like before, my goals were for the whole year. Now I'm like, oh no, my goal's going to have to be for the next 3 months. I'm going to have to reset what books we're reading, what we're going to learn. If I have to reset, if like, oh, I'm used to this so much and now I'm having to reset, that's really hard for my personality. I don't go with flow as much as I would like to go. So going to therapy has been really helpful because seasons change. And so I need to change with them. I can't just set everything in stone. So it was really helpful for me to set different goals according to whatever season I was on. Again, I'm not in crisis right now. I was 3 years ago when my mom passed. I was even before that when I was dating that person, but I'm not right now. And yet I need somebody to help me kind of structure things.
For some reason, we
Mm.
we want to just say, I started going to therapy for one thing, and now that's not the thing that I need help with anymore. I'm not going to go to therapy.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you can't acknowledge that your life is different now, even though you said 5 months ago in therapy, this is what I want my life to look like. Now I don't. You can tell your therapist that.
Yeah.
They're not going to tell you, no, we already worked on this in the past. You have to
Right.
stick to it. It's a fluid thing that you do have a sense of control over what you talk about, particularly what you want to work on. It's not that they're going to come and manage your life.
Right. People usually tend to stop going as much when they start to feel better, which is interesting because I say, keep going. Keep going because those are the times when you start to feel better, you actually have the capacity to grow a lot more.
Like the time and energy.
Yes. And the capability in your emotional stability to actually look at the things that you wouldn't normally look at, right? So the crisis, you came because of a crisis and then you start to feel better. And then people stop. And I'm like, no, if you keep going just 6 months, 8 months longer, you actually will become the person that you want to be because you have the ability and you are in a mental health state where you can put more effort into being a better you.
I do think like, oh, well, now I feel better. I'm going to stop for a few months. And it's like, you're only ever in therapy when you're going through a
Yes.
crisis.
Yeah.
And you can only build to a point.
Right. Yeah. It's like not going to your checkups. Or you still have to go. Just because you don't have a cavity doesn't mean you don't have to go. Maybe not once a month or maybe not every week, but you need to go according to what you need.
That's where the frequency of sessions comes in, right? Maybe at a certain point in your life, you really need to go every week and you are going every week. Some people I've seen come twice a week. Sometimes for one thing, you can't afford that or it doesn't fit into your schedule and you come once a month and that's perfectly fine. Your therapist doesn't even expect you to come regularly. You can feel okay canceling within a certain amount of time if it's an overwhelming thing.
That's important. They asked first session, they're like, when should I come back? And I'm like, I cannot tell you that. I wish to an extent that I could, but I can't because I don't want for you to be financially stressed. But it is my job to work with whatever you give. Right. So if you say, I can only come once a month, I'm like, great. Once a month for that one 50-minute session to 1 hour session, we're going to sit and we're going to go through whatever it is that you need to go through. Just know that for those 50 minutes, it's going to be hard because you're only giving me 50 minutes a month, which is totally fine, but I can work with that. I think that any counselor's like, well, you have to come this. And I'm like, you're stressing them out and maybe even pushing them away from coming and counseling at all. If you're going to say you have to be, it's like, I think I had a chiropractor who told me I had to come like twice a week or something. Like, I'm not coming. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I back then I was like, I can't afford this. I'm not going to come. So I decided not to come at all.
Yeah.
I found one that I felt comfortable with that I ask him even now. And every time I'm pregnant, I go. And I was like, when should I come back? He was like, whenever you don't feel good. This is being pregnant. It's not a crisis. Whenever you want to come back, try to come back more towards the end if you're able. But if there's this freedom to choose, like, oh yes, I can determine where my finances are going to go.
Yeah,
And
it's
that's
not a
important.
subscription where you
Right.
think you need to be getting. It's not like, oh, I'm paying this much per month. I need to go this many times. You pay per session, and you don't even have to think, oh, I'm going to go 10 times from the get-go. You can just try it. It can be discouraging for people who don't find the right fit on the first try, and then they think, oh, I shouldn't go back to counseling. So how would you talk about finding the right fit for you?
Find someone who aligns with your values. And that's really important. I've been thinking through this because we were just talking about in one of our meetings about consultation calls. I don't think I've ever had a consultation call with any of the counselors that I've seen. But I didn't know their values. How did I know their values? They saw a friend of mine. They saw a friend of mine. I looked through their website. I like what I saw. Immediately, I felt good about it. For me, it's always been really important that they're Christian counselors. That has to be somewhere in their bio. And because people have talked about them, I'll usually say, like, okay, this will be a good fit for me. There's been a couple of times that I just randomly I chose somebody and it wasn't a good fit. But normally, if one of my really good friends is seeing them, a really close friend is seeing them, that the likelihood of me fitting in with them is very high. Because obviously my closest best friends, similar values as I do. So that's important. Then finances. Ask myself, how do I think that I need to go in this season of my life? And so if I want to go 4 times a month, then I do have to look for somebody who's not as much, right? Who fits that criteria of, hey, my friends know them. I trust the owner. Maybe I don't know all the counselors there. Actually, my last counselor was like, I trusted the owner. And it was far enough away from Atlanta that I was like, I'm probably not going to see this counselor ever around my circles. And I want to go every week for a number of months. So I want her to be in that range of like 120 or something like that. That's how I chose.
It's also okay to change counselors. It doesn't mean that because you've seen
yeah.
somebody for 6 months. Sometimes it takes time to realize what does and doesn't work for you or to build a rapport.
Yeah.
It's not anybody's fault either. That just wasn't the person for me. I've seen one counselor and it's very talk based, as most therapy is. And that was fine. I thought was good for a while. But I had a different counselor who she saw kids. Apparently, I need somebody who sees kids because she had things in her office to do. Not that I would play with toys, but like painting. That's really helpful to me to have something that we're both doing
I think I've seen 5 different counselors
in 15 years.
in 15 years. They all brought something different. And I remember specifically, I called her EMDR for my last one. She does EMDR, but we still haven't done EMDR together. That's been okay because she's used another model that I never thought that I would like, that I was actually kind of like, I don't know about this. But I think sometimes people call and they're like, I need this method. What they're saying is, I want to be healed. I want my marriage to work. I've heard somewhere in the internet, TikTok, whatever it is, that this is the way to get there, right?
To fix it.
To fix it. And I'm like, I thought I needed EMDR. I didn't need EMDR. I actually needed whatever that counselor brought to me. And I trusted her enough to be like, okay, let's try it out. So whatever it is that you think, especially modalities that you think that you need, I'm like, just trust a counselor more than you trust whatever a TikTok said about, unless you have high trauma, and then yeah, you need EMDR.
There are situations, if you have a specific disorder, it's important to find somebody who has worked with that.
Yes.
But in general, it's not the method that you need. It's the right person, the person who understands what you need.
For you, you would have never known you needed a children's therapist because she has stuff that you can do with her. Or maybe because they tend to be more structured because they're dealing with younger kids. You would have never known that. Yet that's exactly what you needed. I don't have stuff like that in my office. Danielle sits teens and they tend to be very distractible. So she does have stuff in it. I know my sister probably couldn't sit in an office for an hour. She probably needs to fidget, and that's okay.
That's why having a rigid expectation of which system and model you need isn't always the most important thing, as it is to like be flexible and open to like what does work. All the counselors are different. One counselor is never going to give you a worksheet, but I need a worksheet. That was totally just by finding the nearest person to me who took insurance. And she mostly saw kids, but she sees young adult women too.
I will say there used to be like this idea that counselors who take insurance were not good counselors. And I will say that has changed a lot in the recent years. Even after the pandemic, people are starting to use their insurance more. And so more and more counselors are taking it.
What would you say is that maybe this isn't the right counselor for me?
Oh, I think it's different. I always go back to values. So I think that that's different. If some counselors are talking about crystals to me or mantras or crystals, or I'll be like, okay, not for me. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It could be for you, but it's just not for me because it doesn't align with my personal values. Not that you have to read your Bible to me at all. None of them have, but you also can't be that far off into like spiritual stuff that I just don't believe in because then I won't believe in what she's saying when she gives me advice or whenever she's commenting about something. So I would say anything that you hear, you're like, that's just not aligning with my values, right? Like if you are a Christian, you're having a hard time. I'm not saying any trauma or physical abuse or anything like that, but you're just having a hard time with your marriage. I have had clients that come to me in marriage therapy and are like, well, our last one told us to get divorced. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, well, that didn't align with your values. That is a covenant, and we stay together. So looking at things like that.
What I would say is not on the first session, but after a few, you need to notice, am I opening up to this person as well? And then is that because I'm not wanting to, or what is it? Is it the way they speak to me? I can be quite talkative. I can just lead it.
Mm.
That's not good because I need somebody who is going to push back more.
Yeah. I would say agree. Someone who agrees in your values, but doesn't just let you, isn't just agreeable
Yeah, with whatever you
with
say.
whatever you say. Yeah. I would, there has to be some tension. I think I like the tension of me saying something and they saying something else. And I'm like, huh, you just called me out. You know, I was just
It's a
called out.
different perspective.
And that's a different perspective. And let me chew on that. Even with the counselor I have now, she said something. I was like, huh, I don't know that I agree with that, but I can process it and I can go through it and something good came out of it, you know?
There are counselors who really don't do that. From being a more listening perspective, that's something that people think, well, why can't I just talk in my room for an hour? Why can't I just journal for an hour? Why can't I talk to my friend for an hour?
Sure.
And it's the response is important. Obviously, therapy is a lot about listening, but how do you navigate pushing back on when people aren't realizing something about themselves or the situation?
In therapy,
Mhm.
like how do I do it?
Mhm.
I'm very direct, so I just tell them.
But a lot of people wouldn't. So
I'm like, I usually say something along like, I'm like, you said this, I know you're saying this, and that's not aligning. Can you tell me more? Or I'm not understanding. Which person do you want to be? Do you want to be this person? Do you want to be this person? You know, when single people come in, they're like, I want this. And I'm like, okay, but you're doing this to help me understand why that's not matching up. Where's that coming from that you don't believe that you can get this? So I'm very more direct. Not every counselor is like that, and that's okay. But that's just how I am.
Mhm.
That's just my
And it's not
personality.
an attack.
Yeah.
And people don't want to be attacked or told what to do. But your therapist, they care about you. They don't care what you do, though. Like they're not trying to tell you what to
No, no. I'm just trying to tell you what I see. So then if I'm a mirror, right? So it's like you are telling me you want all these things, but you're doing all these things. Then I am here to tell you what I see, and you tell me if you're okay with that or not. If you're not okay with that, then we can work to change it. And if you are okay with that, do whatever you want.
do. Is that a satisfying moment, like when somebody finally starts seeing things in a different way?
I think so because internally, I think that they want to. Otherwise, they wouldn't have come to me. I think that they really want to change. And then there's something in them that it's preventing them from going that step further. So to be the one that kind of just pushes them over the edge and be like, listen, you keep going this path, this is where you're going to end up. And hopefully they trust me. But by now, I've seen hundreds of people. So this is the pattern that I see. Hopefully they trust me. And then that's fun to work together in that. I will say my last red flag that I want to say with picking, choosing a counselor, or being in therapy, it's like if your friends, family members, people that know you well, that love you well, not just anybody down the street or any friend, say that they haven't really seen change in you and you've been in therapy with the same counselor for 6 years, I would probably change.
It might get worse before it gets better, though.
Sure. But like if you're not starting to set better boundaries with your family members. If something in your life is not changing, having those hard conversations. I don't mean that people have to like you, because sometimes you start setting boundaries and people just don't like you. I don't mean like everybody has to like you, because that's not true. But if you're not seeing change and people are not seeing change, and you keep talking about the same thing for 6, 10 years, there's somebody else that has a different tool that could help you get there.
That's a good general goal for therapy then, is like the openness to change your perspective, and then the openness to change how you approach things and how you do things. There is going to be months, several months maybe, where you do talk about the same thing. But if after a while you don't approach the same situation and do something a little bit differently than the way that it hurt you in the past, that's maybe a sign that you need to work on it more or change counselors, or there shouldn't be stagnance for a really long time.
And don't be scared. I think I usually know when one of my clients has been with me and they need to start seeing somebody else that offers something different. Or sometimes I've taken on I love my clients, but sometimes I've taken on clients that I'm like, ooh, this was just not a good fit. And then they stop coming. And I'm like, Lord, thank you, because this just wasn't a good fit. I think if you're starting to feel that, then maybe it's time to change to somebody different. And that's okay, because your counselor, whoever you're seeing, they will get different clients.
You said something important about change, right? It might not all feel like positive change. Like when you're processing, you might feel worse and you might feel sad for a while. When you start setting boundaries, then the people around you might not like you as much. It's also okay to realize you've set your life up to be surrounded by people who don't want you to set boundaries. As we talked about in the beginning, the way that you show up shows up in everything, and it shows up in the way that you structured your life. So there are things that might need to be rebuilt in a different way.
Yeah. I have a client who comes in, she'll say, okay, Myra, I did not do that, but I did do this. And it's like a small win, It's a small win. And I'm like, we have to start with small wins. We have to start with like little bit. I'm not telling you cut your people out. I would never tell you to do that. It's like, but they did get mad at me that I set this boundary. And even though it was a small boundary, I did it anyway. So those moments I remember having in counseling room, I was like, huh, I'm growing, even for my personal growth. Like, I remember thinking, my husband's right. Thanks to counseling and people and mentorship. And those moments that you just kind of shock yourself because you've done something for so long, but then you do it differently. And you're like, it was small, but I did it.
It's good to celebrate those small wins. It's also okay for it to be a sad win. Like, oh, I realized this person isn't a good friend, but I didn't realize that before.
Yeah.
Because we never talked about anything.
And we all have that.
Now that I have grown a little bit and become a different person, you might have to leave people behind who aren't doing that. And you can't force them to come with you, and you can't make them go to therapy. But that's a good sign that you can even start seeing differences. Changing the perspective, changing the lens, right? Before you went to therapy, life was just one way.
Right.
So to start noticing things is a really big deal, because you wouldn't have otherwise.
I hope you know that you need to go to therapy. You should go to therapy, find a therapist, whether it's me, whether it's somebody else out there. We highly recommend it. And I hope that this was helpful in any way, shape, or form.
The Bible verse for this season is Isaiah 26:3. You keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you give us peace when we focus our eyes on you. Father, I pray in places of hopelessness in our lives where we feel like, whether we have a brother or sister or friend or spouse who has narcissism or addiction, and we're feeling hopeless in those moments, Lord, I pray that your hope will come into our hearts and that we will remain steadfast in you, that we can remain trusting you and trusting that you will give us the hope that we need to walk out each day, the hardships that life brings. Thank you for your Spirit. And Holy Spirit, we just invite your peace over us today and every day. Amen.